G'day guys, Ryan here from Next Level Adventures and welcome back today to another post-trip analysis video. In today's video we're going to be having a look at the Power Plus Throttle Controller that I have installed in the Pajero. So you probably would have noticed that in the big 2022 adventure series that's just completed over here on the channel that I would have been talking about the Power Plus Throttle Controller there in some of the episodes, what settings I was using, how it was running and all of that good stuff. So in this video, I'm going to be giving you guys an in-depth review on how that product fared for me and how it's done over the last 6 or so months that it's been in the truck. So let's jump right into this one with how was the truck before I put the throttle controller in and why did I think it was time to get one. So the car itself is a 2013 NW GLXR Pajero. It is a 3.2 litre turbo diesel with an automatic transmission. Now before I fitted the car with a 2-inch lift and 33-inch tyres, it was running the standard suspension with just 31-inch tyres. Around that time it averaged around about 10 to 11 litres per 100 and it had pretty good throttle response at that time. So I could have left the truck as it was on 31s with standard suspension, but it was very incapable compared to what it is now, and like every other adventure seeker, I wanted this truck to go further and be more capable so I can get to some of those places. So I lifted it with a 2-inch Old Man Emu suspension lift and I fitted 33-inch Goodyear Wrangler Duratrax onto this truck, giving it a fair bit of lift. So when I did that, the fuel consumption jumped up dramatically and the throttle response was pretty damn terrible. So I went from the 10 to 11 litres per 100 that I was having on stock suspension with 31s all the way up to about 16 to 17 litres per 100, and the car was revving out ridiculously just getting up to speed in some instances. It was particularly hard on hills. It felt like I was basically constantly towing after I fitted the lift and the tyres. And then to add that on, I also fitted on the rooftop tent and completely refitted the entire touring setup in the back, adding in a lot of weight. And well, that really didn't help with the fuel consumption. So for a few good months, I was driving around with all this extra weight on without the throttle controller, and I really felt it struggle. The biggest difference was definitely when I lifted it and I put the bigger tyres on. It just felt like it was struggling a whole lot more, especially as just said, on those hill climbs, it really had to work. I noticed the car revving out a lot and there was a lot of turbo lag as well. I felt like if the car just had that little bit more oomph, just a little bit, that it would put it into the right rev range and the turbo would come on at the right time and I would save a lot of fuel and also have the right amount of power at the right time instead of having to rev it out to get the power. So there are a few options on the table for me as to what I could do to resolve this issue, and number one was of course get a tune, and at this point in time that wasn't really the most appealing option as I hadn't done a lot of research into it, as well as it's quite expensive and I'd have to play around with it a bit, fiddle with the reliability of the truck. I also had not fitted a snorkel at this point, so it would just be like pouring money down the drain to get it right. Now that's not saying that tuning your car is not a viable option. It was just not a viable option for me at that point in time, as I kind of wanted a quick solution that I could get done very quickly and not require much fiddling. And so option 2 was a throttle controller. Now this was a little bit more settling, as I knew that if I installed the throttle controller and it didn't work or it was too much or whatever, I could always revert the car back to its standard throttle response and then go to option B, which would have been tuning it. So with all that being said, I pulled the trigger on a Power Plus Throttle Controller and installed it in the car. So before I jump into my experiences with the Power Plus Throttle Controller and how it worked for me, let me explain to you guys a little bit what actually is turbo lag and what am I talking about when I say that. I'll do my best to explain it in the most simple way, as it can be fairly complex if you look right into it, but to simply put it, turbo lag is, in a modern diesel engine, when you put your foot on the accelerator, it's the time in between when you engage the accelerator and you feel the power from the turbocharger kicking in. So obviously we know that a lot of modern diesel engines do require turbochargers to access their maximum power. If modern diesels didn't have turbos, they'd be incredibly underpowered and, well, no one would buy them. So Turbo lag is the time in between when you put your foot on the accelerator and start accelerating to when the turbocharger kicks in and gives you that power. So on most standard four-wheel drives, that's pretty quickly, but for me, when I lifted the truck, it increased the turbo lag. The turbo was not kicking in till at least 3,000 RPM, which is just ridiculous. Before, it was kicking in around 900 to 1,100 RPM, putting the car with its maximum torque right in that 2,000 RPM rev range, which is what saves fuel. So that is kind of the issue, as simply as I can put it, that I was trying to fix. The time in between when I put my foot onto the accelerator and started accelerating, and the time between then and when the turbo would kick in increased when I lifted the car. And some other people may experience this if you lift your four-wheel drive. It is not specific to Pajeros. It can happen to, well, pretty much any modern diesel four-wheel drive with a turbo. So now you understand what turbo lag is in its most simple form and what my experiences and issues were with the truck before fitting the throttle controller in. Let's jump into my experiences and, well, did the Power Plus controller do what I expected it to do and fix my problem? So the installation of the Power Plus throttle controller is fairly simple. Okay, inside the box comes the unit and then a little cable, and that cable plugs into your throttle sensor cable and acts kind of like a relay. So basically, it's similar, I would say, in all modern four-wheel drives. For the Pajero, my experience was pretty simple. I just unplugged my throttle sensor cable, which in the Pajero is located right above the accelerator pedal, popped that out, plugged in the Power Plus adapter piece, and then plugged the Pajero's original cable into the top, and it kind of acts like a relay. On that relay cable that you get, there is a little wire that runs to the unit that you plug straight into the unit, and that is it. It is as simple as that. You've got the Power Plus throttle controller installed. For me, the installation was pretty simple. Getting the cable unplugged in the Pajero was quite difficult due to the spot that it's located in, but that's a vehicle issue, nothing to do with the product itself. So once you have the throttle controller installed, it will turn itself on whenever you turn the vehicle on. Now, there is a very rare instance that your vehicle will rev up and the throttle controller will be incompatible. If that happens, I just advise that you contact Power Plus support and they'll sort that out for you. But in everybody else's case, you turn the vehicle on and the throttle controller will turn on as well. Now, there are a fair few options on this throttle controller, but I just want to talk about the main power modes first. So the cool thing about the Power Plus throttle controller is that you have the ability to keep the vehicle in your normal throttle response if necessary. So I do this when I'm off-road in 4 low. So I think in 4 low, the Pajero doesn't need any extra throttle response at all, so I don't use the power modes. However, when I'm driving around, I do. So there's F1, which is just a little bit more power than normal. It's not full, it's just a little bit more, gives it that little bit more oomph, and this is my favorite mode. There's F2, which you could use in hilly situations where you just need that little bit more power than the F1 setting, and you just need to get up the hill, or maybe you're overtaking someone. F3 is for access to full potential. So F3 is where you're maybe overtaking someone on a hill, overtaking in general. You just need access to your vehicle's full power instantly, and that's what the F3 setting is for. What's cool about these different power mode settings, F1, 2, and 3, is that you can actually dial each one up and down as necessary. So with the F1, I can dial that down back towards the original throttle response if necessary. Same as F2, I can dial that down back towards F1 if I want to, and likewise with F3. You can dial that back down a little bit as well. So that's really cool. In fact, there are over 36 options within these 3 settings to dial it back down or up and adjust and choose what you want to do. For me, the first setting works the best, and I'll explain why later on. So the other options on the throttle controller besides the power settings, as mentioned, is normal. So you can keep your vehicle in the normal throttle response if necessary. Now, I think that is really cool, as it basically means that if you are having any issues or anything like that, you can just switch it back to normal and everything will be all right. The other option is EC mode. Now, this is pretty cool because this is like a rock crawling 4-wheel drive mode where it basically dims down the vehicle's throttle response. So when you put your foot down on the accelerator, it obviously doesn't take off. It gives you a very good controlled response over your throttle when you're off-road. This is really good for those rock crawling situations, or where you need to be really careful with the acceleration of your vehicle. Maybe you don't want to put too much. That is where you use the EC mode and you find yourself crawling over obstacles with ease. So there's another really cool option on this throttle controller that I think is it's awesome. So the Power Plus Throttle Controller has this inbuilt technology with a really fast processor that basically allows it to track your driving habits. So there's an automatic mode, it's called, on the Power Plus Throttle Controller, and basically, as said, it tracks your driving habits and basically adjusts the throttle response to when you need it. So it'll figure out when you're trying to overtake someone by the fact that you've just booted the accelerator pedal, and it'll give you all the power that you need to overtake that person. It'll realize when you're just driving around town, and it'll just give you a normal throttle response, or maybe add a little bit more in there. It also has a fuel saving mode, which is really cool. Now, I'm personally yet to try out this automatic throttle response setting, as I find myself needing more throttle response than normal all the time. However, I have heard good things about it and that it does work. It is a little bit interesting as to how it works. As said, really fast processing unit on the Power Plus controller that allows it to do this, and I just think that is really cool. So now let's move on to my application and my experiences with the Power Plus Throttle Controller. So as I stated before installing the throttle controller into the Pajero, I was experiencing incredible turbo lag. So once the Power Plus Throttle Controller was installed, I took it on its maiden voyage, and the difference was noticeable almost immediately. It's important to note here as well that I was brand new to the throttle controller scene at this time. I'd never owned one before in any vehicle, and I didn't really know what they could do. So I noticed the fuel consumption drop back down immediately to where it was before I lifted it. I was driving around in the F1 setting, which was just that little bit more than normal. And as I said at the start, I felt like the car just needed that little bit more response than normal to get it back down to where it was. It almost felt like it was not lifted anymore, and I was getting that right amount of throttle response to get the turbo on at the right time, at the right rev range to save fuel. Now, with that being said, that's with all the extra weight. I didn't take anything out of the car, didn't change anything about it, just installed the throttle controller, and I was really, really happy with it originally. The response was literally within seconds. From the time I put my foot on the accelerator, I could feel the car put me in the back of my seat again. On my maiden voyage to OFA, the car was back down to 11.1 litres per 100, which is right where it was before I lifted it. And I thought that was just fantastic. I didn't know that it would have that much of an impact on my throttle response. And that was only on the F1 setting. I didn't have to put it into anything higher. Just that little bit extra power, put it back down to where it was supposed to be, which I was really, really happy with. So I do tend to switch it up a little bit between the other power settings when I'm driving, particularly in hilly regions and when I need to overtake. I find myself driving around in F2 sometimes in hilly regions, and of course, when I need to overtake vehicles, especially on hills, I find myself driving around in F3, but to be honest, not for very long, as it is a lot of power driving around in F3. I don't see myself needing that much power. But I really wanted to stress how much of a difference it really does make compared to normal. Like when you drive the car around again in normal, the difference is just incredible. It's so noticeable, and like, I don't think I'll ever go back to driving around in normal on the road again, let's just say that. So I really put this product through its paces on the 2022 Adventure Series. I was testing it out in all sorts of conditions, seeing how it fared and seeing the difference that it made. I mostly use this product, as said, on road. I don't really use it off-road in 4 low because I feel like the vehicle doesn't need any extra throttle response there. I only feel like it needs it when it's on road, on the highway, in 2-wheel drive. So I'll play you guys the scenes from the 2022 Adventure Series in just a second so you can see what I was doing and what I was running, and then we'll take the Pajero for a spin and show you guys. Just a little note for the old Power Plus Throttle Controller that I'm running here in the Pajero. When I'm off-road, I like to switch it back to the normal throttle response until I really need it. However, on the highway, I find myself running a steady 1.9, which is their first setting. I think that that's the ideal throttle response for the Pajero. It's just like that little bit more than normal that just helps me get the fuel consumption back to where it should be and the perfect amount of power, and it's not too much too. So now we're heading back out to tonight's camp spot. We're back on the road, and I have set the Power Plus Throttle Controller to the 2.9 setting for this journey, and that is because there are a fair few hills in this region, and I just want to have the right amount of power to get up those hills, that little bit more than I normally would. So that should do me well, and I should have plenty of power to get up the hills heading into this region. So now you can see how well the throttle controller performed on the trip and how versatile it is. I was chopping and changing all the time to try and find the right settings for the conditions I was in. One thing is for sure though, I will never go back to driving the car normally with the normal throttle response setting on the road again. Now with that being said, I do change the car back to its normal throttle response setting only in 4 low, and that is, as I said, the same reason. I don't feel like the car needs the extra throttle response in low range compared to 2-wheel drive. That's just me. You can use that in low range. It's not going to damage anything. I just don't feel like I need to. Anyway, with all of that being said, let's take you guys for a spin and show you the difference firsthand as to what this controller does compared to normal. So here we are in the Pajero. Now what you're looking at here is the normal throttle response setting with the Power Plus Throttle Controller switched off or in normal mode. You will see that I have to put my foot fairly hard on the accelerator pedal before the car will even begin to move. The turbo takes ages to kick in, and the performance of the vehicle is average at best. It's incredibly sluggish and takes almost 20 seconds and a hell of a lot of effort just to get up to speed. My foot is almost flat on the accelerator at this point. So now we switch our attention to the F1 setting, which is my favorite setting for this controller. This is a setting I continuously refer to as a little bit more than normal. Instead of having to put my foot right down on the accelerator pedal to receive the power, it is almost instantaneous. It's about as responsive as the vehicle was when it was stock. Using this mode has saved me so much fuel since installing and is definitely my favourite. But keep in mind, this vehicle is lifted with larger tyres and a lot more weight, so it's impressive that this mode was able to bring it back down to feel like new again. If you were to put this on a stock vehicle, the difference would be insane. Now let's change our focus over to the F2 setting. This setting adds more response than the F1 setting, but isn't quite unlocking the vehicle's full potential. You can see just how responsive it is, and it's really good for hill climbing situations where you want to keep up your momentum. I use this setting when travelling through hilly regions and sometimes when I'm overtaking. Now finally we move on to the final power mode, which is F3. The difference compared to normal with F3 is incredible. You are almost instantly put into the back of your seat. This mode is unlocking your vehicle's maximum throttle response and is best for overtaking and overtaking on hills. I don't use this mode much, but it definitely works. Well, welcome back guys. What an awesome piece of gear, and you can just see the difference compared to normal in the Pajero. So if it's not obvious by now, I would definitely recommend the Power Plus Throttle Controller to anyone in a similar boat to me. You just feel like you need that little bit more power than normal to get the most out of your four-wheel drive, get the fuel consumption back down to normal. I know a fair few people that are looking at lifting their four-wheel drive, and this definitely is the most cost-effective way to get that power back where you need it. So before we wrap this one up, I think that it is a little bit important just to touch on a final note to do with throttle controllers in general. So the Power Plus Throttle Controller doesn't have any access to your injector timing, air, all that sort of stuff to do with how you would tune an engine. It simply just accesses power that the manufacturer has limited and gives you full throttle response access. So it doesn't impact anything else, doesn't play around with all the timing and stuff of your engine. It simply just improves your throttle response. Well guys, it's now time to wrap up this post-trip review on the Power Plus Throttle Controller, and as I said, if it's not obvious by now, I definitely recommend the Power Plus Throttle Controller to anyone who is after a decent unit that works well. The product itself, I simply cannot fault at this stage. I'm very, very happy with it. The customer service team at Power Plus is brilliant as well. They get back to you really, really fast, and they're incredibly pleasant to deal with. I simply just cannot say a bad thing about them at this stage, and I'm really happy that I did get my hands on a Power Plus Throttle Controller at the time that I did, because if I didn't, my fuel bill on the 2022 Adventure Series would have been probably doubled. It would have been massive. And so I'm really happy that I pulled the trigger on that when I did. Anyway guys, if you enjoyed this one, be sure to leave a like on the video, consider subscribing so you don't miss any adventures or updates that I may do regarding the Power Plus Throttle Controller and the Pajero in general, of course. If you have any questions, be sure to leave them down in the comments section below. Leave your thoughts down there as well, guys. And thanks for watching, and as always, we will see you in the next adventure.